Hello. My name is Luna. I live in a small lakeside town in Camden, Maine, where the seasons change like chapters in a novel and the fog rolls over the water like a secret. I'm 70 now. And no, I don't say that with any shame. These hands have cooked for governors, kneaded dough through grief, and poured wine for strangers who later became family. For most of my life, I've kept my heart tucked safely behind the warmth of a stove and the clatter of serving platters. But last year, something shattered. And tonight, I'm going to tell you how I put the pieces back together. It started on a Thursday evening in early October. The leaves were turning gold and crimson, and the air smelled of apples and firewood. I had spent the last 3 days preparing for what I thought might be the most important night of my life. Not my wedding, not my retirement, but a dinner, a private tasting in my own home for 4 potential investors who had the power to keep my catering company, Sage and Thyme, alive. You see, Sage and Thyme wasn't just a business. It was the lifeboat that saved me after my husband Jack died 5 years ago. When grief carved holes in me I couldn't fill, I turned to the only thing that ever made sense: cooking. What started as boxed lunches for neighbors turned into weekend brunches. Then weddings, corporate events, and food festivals. My name began to appear in local write-ups. And before long, Sage and Thyme was my livelihood, my pride, and my only anchor in a world that no longer made sense. But COVID hit hard. Bookings dried up. Supplies doubled in price, and my savings started to evaporate. I needed help. Real help. So when a former client introduced me to a group of investors from Boston, I invited them to my home, not a fancy restaurant, but my kitchen, my table, my world. I polished the antique silver, steamed the linen napkins, and wore the emerald green dress Jack always said made my eyes shine. At exactly 6:45, the first guest arrived, and with him walked a ghost I never thought I'd see again. He was older now, silver hair, tan coat, strong posture, but his eyes hadn't changed. William Ashford, the man I almost married in college, the man I lost not because I stopped loving him, but because I didn't believe I deserved him. As I opened the door and saw him standing there, smiling like no time had passed, I felt a tremor deep in my chest. I thought I had prepared for everything that night, but I wasn't prepared for what or who would try to destroy it. William stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over the dining room like he remembered it from another life. And maybe, in a way, I did. Back in college, we used to talk about opening a bed and breakfast in the Berkshires, with fresh scones every morning and a garden out back where I'd grow lavender and thyme. Life, of course, had other plans. I guided him and the other guests, 2 women from a restaurant group in Boston, and a quiet investor from Providence, toward the candlelit table. The centerpiece was simple wildflowers from the farmer's market and a few sprigs of rosemary. The menu was local, seasonal, heartfelt, just like me. Everything was going smoothly. Laughter floated between bites of pear brie tartlets. I walked them through the vision for Sage and Thyme's expansion, how I wanted to train older women who'd been pushed out of the workforce, how I dreamed of opening a community kitchen that doubled as a teaching space. William asked thoughtful questions, his hand lingering a moment too long on the rim of his wine glass every time our eyes met. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Then the front door slammed. I didn't have to look. I knew that sound. Heavy boots. A rustle of a worn leather bag. And then the voice. Well, isn't this cozy? Charlotte. My daughter's tone cut through the air like a sharp wind off the harbor. She stood in the archway between the foyer and the dining room. Hair tangled, eyes smudged with old mascara, the collar of her blouse stained with something that might have been red wine or regret. She reeked of gin and bitterness. I stood frozen, holding a tray of rosemary cornbread. Charlotte stared at the table, then at me, then at William. Her eyes narrowed. So, this is what it looks like when you pretend everything's fine. My heart sank. I could feel the tension ripple through the room. Mrs. Whitaker, the restaurant group rep, shifted uncomfortably. William's expression stayed calm, but his jaw tightened. Charlotte, I said gently. Maybe this isn't the time. Oh, it's the perfect time, she snapped, stepping closer. Why don't you tell them how you chose your little catering fantasy over being a real mother? Why don't you tell them how I've spent the last 5 years picking up your emotional scraps while you chased Pinterest recipes and magazine spreads? The words hit me harder than any slap. I looked around the room at the strangers who no longer seemed interested in investing. At the table I'd so carefully laid. At William, who watched with quiet disbelief. And then, Charlotte said the words that shattered everything. You're being stupid. Mom, go do something useful for once. Go wash the damn dishes. The words clanged through the room louder than the sound of the wine glass. Charlotte knocked off the sideboard. It shattered across the floor, tiny crystal shards spraying like judgment. No one moved. Not even me. I stood there, tray still in my hands, heat rising up my neck, my chest aching in a way I hadn't felt since Jack's final days. Charlotte didn't blink. Her eyes, bloodshot and cold, locked onto mine with a mix of anger and triumph, like she'd finally won something. The guests excused themselves quickly. Awkward handshakes, murmured apologies, a few business cards left behind out of politeness. Within 10 minutes, they were all gone. The door clicked shut. The room was silent except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the slow drip of wine from the edge of the tablecloth. Charlotte didn't say another word. She kicked off her boots and disappeared upstairs like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just taken a knife to everything I'd built. And then, as I stood in the wreckage of my evening of my reputation, my business, my hope, I felt something touch my shoulder. William, let me help you clean this up, he said softly. You don't have to, I whispered. I'm sure you have somewhere better to be. He crouched beside me, picking up the shards of glass with his bare hands. Actually, Luna, I don't. He said my name like he still carried it in his chest. We worked in silence. He rinsed dishes while I scrubbed wine out of the lace runner. At some point, I forgot to cry. Maybe because crying would have meant admitting this was the end. And I wasn't ready to give Charlotte that satisfaction. When the last plate was stacked and the floor was clean, we stood in the kitchen under the soft yellow light above the sink. He leaned against the counter. I leaned against memory. How long have you known? I asked. That you were Luna Morgan. The moment I saw your name on the proposal? And you came anyway, I had to see for myself. There was a long pause. Then I asked the question I hadn't dared ask in 50 years. Why did you stop writing? William's expression cracked. I didn't. I wrote every week. For almost 2 years. Your mother told me you'd moved on. That you were getting married? That I needed to let you go. The air seemed to thin around us. I never got a single letter, I said. We stared at each other, two people with separate lives stitched together by a lie neither of us told. I never married, he said quietly. Not really. No one ever felt like you. The words landed with more grace than I expected. But I was too tired to hold them, too wounded to believe they could fix what had just broken. Because upstairs, my daughter was asleep in a bed I paid for, inside a house I built. After burning down everything I had left, the next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's dress. My hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The light outside was thin and gray, and everything in the house felt like it had shifted an inch to the left. Like nothing was where it belonged anymore. The phone rang. I stared at it. 3 rings. 4. On the 5th, I picked up. Mrs. Morgan, this is Elise from the Harborview Estate Club. I'm calling about the Langston wedding in November. My breath caught. That contract was worth more than 2 months' bookings. Yes. Elise. What can I help you with? Well, it's a little awkward, but we've had some concerns brought to our attention. Concerns. A woman called yesterday. Said she was your daughter. She mentioned memory problems, that you'd been struggling to manage events lately. The words blurred. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She said she felt responsible to warn us that you might not be able to handle something as large as the Langston wedding. My fingers gripped the phone tighter. My heart pounded. My own daughter was sabotaging me. Not just once. Not just in a drunken outburst, but deliberately, methodically. I understand. I said, thank you for letting me know. We'll be canceling the contract. You'll receive the termination fee as per Clause 3B. Of course. Thank you. I hung up. Then I sat in silence. The phone still in my hand, listening to the distant hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the pipes in the walls. Grief is a strange thing. You think you've lived through the worst of it, the funeral, the empty bed, the birthdays missed. But nothing compares to grieving someone who's still alive, who eats at your table, sleeps in the next room, and quietly destroys you. Around noon, I heard her. Charlotte's footsteps coming down the stairs. The clink of the coffee pot. The cabinet door slamming. She walked into the kitchen like it was just another day. Her sweatshirt stained. Her hair pulled into a messy bun. Mascara still faintly smudged. Morning, she muttered, pouring her coffee. We need to talk. God. Mom. Not now. My head is killing me. She took a sip, wincing at the heat. It can't wait. She rolled her eyes. What now? The Langston wedding is cancelled. She paused, her mug halfway to her mouth. That's too bad. They got a phone call yesterday. From you. She didn't deny it. Didn't even flinch. She just set her mug down and leaned against the counter. I did what I had to do, she said flatly. To protect you from yourself. You lied. No. Mom, I told the truth. You're too proud to admit. I stared at her. At this woman I raised. And I realized, in that moment, I wasn't speaking to my daughter anymore. I was speaking to my enemy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with the curtains half drawn, the moon casting soft shadows across the hardwood floor. My hands rested on my lap, trembling slightly, not from age, but from something deeper. A kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It whispers. It echoes. It reshapes everything you thought you knew about love. She did this to me. She didn't just hurt me in a moment of anger. She planned it. She made calls. She told lies that sounded just believable enough to pass. She took from me the very thing I'd rebuilt after Jack. The business. The joy. The purpose. And the worst part, she thought she was justified. In her world. I was the one slipping. I was the fragile one. The weak one. I heard the floorboards creak behind me. William stood there, holding a steaming mug in each hand. Couldn't sleep either. Who? He sat beside me, offering the mug. Chamomile. Just like we used to drink when we were 20 and invincible. I stared out the window. I think I lost her. You didn't lose her. Luna. She left herself. We sat in silence for a moment. Do you think it's too late? I asked. For what? To start again. He took a long sip of tea. Then turned toward me with a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen in decades. You're Luna Morgan. You built a business out of ashes. You raised a child while grieving a man. You never stopped loving. You didn't break. You bent. And then you stood up again. Sonu. Luna. It's not too late. It never was. I wanted to believe him. But belief requires hope. And hope was something I'd been rationing like medicine lately. The next morning, I rose before the sun. Charlotte was still asleep when I packed her things quietly. Deliberately. I left her suitcase by the door with a short note. I love you. But I can't let you stay in my home while you're trying to burn it down. When she came downstairs, she didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe she didn't. Maybe for the first time in years, I looked like the woman I used to be. I didn't shout. I didn't explain. I just opened the door and stepped aside. She wheeled her suitcase out slowly, paused at the edge of the porch. You always loved the business more than me. No. I said quietly. I just refused to sacrifice myself, to save someone who didn't want saving. She walked away, and for the first time in months, the house felt still. Not empty, just still. Like a wound after the bleeding stops. Later that day, I opened my planner. I made new calls. I reopened the calendar. Because starting over doesn't always mean beginning again. Sometimes, it means choosing yourself. The weeks that followed weren't dramatic. There were no grand gestures. No sudden apologies. No teary reunions. Just silence. A quiet that settled into the corners of the house like dust. But in that silence, something began to grow. Me. I started small. One client at a time. A backyard retirement party. A sweet 16 for a shy teenager named Haley. A garden brunch for a couple renewing their vows after 40 years. There was no press. No attention. But every time I saw someone cry from joy under string lights, I'd hung myself. Or laugh beside a table I'd spent hours designing. Something in me clicked back into place. Like a puzzle I thought was lost. One evening, I was setting up a floral arrangement in the back patio of a coastal inn when a familiar voice called out, Luna. I turned. It was Lauren Chase, head coordinator for the Westport Women's Leadership Summit. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. Didn't know you were still in the game. She smiled. I paused. Thought you replaced me. She laughed softly. We tried. But no one does it like you. She glanced around the venue, nodding at the table settings and the hand-calligraphed menus. You've still got it. We caught up briefly. She told me they were planning this year's summit and wanted someone local. Someone seasoned. Someone who could lead a team with clarity and calm. Would you be willing? It wasn't just a gig. It was a return. A step back into the circle I thought had closed without me. I accepted. That night, I didn't sleep out of worry. I stayed up drafting a vision board. Sketching color palettes. Revisiting themes that used to thrill me. I felt alive. And then, the unexpected. 3 days before the summit, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Charlotte. Mom. I was angry. I was cruel. And I see that now. I wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt when Dad died. When you buried yourself in work. When I felt invisible. But the truth is, I've always admired you. I just didn't know how to say it without resenting how much I needed you. I'm in Portland now. I got a job at a bakery. It's nothing fancy. But it's mine. I hope one day I can come home and not just be your daughter but your friend. Love. Charlotte. I folded the letter, held it to my chest, and let the tears fall. She was gone, but she was also growing. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not a return to how things were, but a quiet becoming. And as I stepped into that Summit ballroom days later, clipboard in hand, headset on, I didn't feel like a woman rebuilding. I felt like a woman already whole. The ballroom shimmered under warm golden lights, the kind that made every face glow just a little softer. Around me, a team of young women buzzed with energy, checking table placements, adjusting stage mics, double-checking the run of show. And there I was, right in the center, guiding, calming, creating. It had been years since I'd felt that kind of rhythm. The pulse of something bigger than just a paycheck. This was purpose. This was legacy. Halfway through the keynote, I slipped to the back of the room and stood in the shadows, watching the audience. Some were taking notes, others wiping quiet tears. That old voice in me, the one that used to whisper, "You're too old, too tired, too late," had finally gone quiet. And in its place was something steadier. After the event wrapped, Lauren pulled me aside backstage. "Luna, I don't know how you did it. Everyone's talking." This was more than an event. It was a statement. I smiled. But I didn't deflect. I let myself receive the praise. Fully. Without shame. Because I had earned it. That night, I went home alone. No husband waiting at the door. No daughter crashing on the couch. Just me, and that was enough. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the fireplace, and opened my journal. I hadn't written in it since Jack died. But now, the pages didn't feel heavy. They felt ready. I wrote to Charlotte, "Sweetheart, your letter reached me like sunlight through a winter window. It hurt. But in the way frozen things hurt when they start to thaw. I miss you. I always will. But I understand now we both needed space to rediscover who we are, without leaning so hard on who we were. There is always a place for you here. Not just in my house, but in my heart. Love always." Mom. When I finished, I didn't cry. I closed the journal and sat in stillness. The kind that isn't lonely but full. I looked around at my home, not perfect. Not filled with noise or family laughter, but filled with peace. The kind of peace that only arrives when you stop asking for the past to return and start building something new with whatever you've got left. Maybe you're listening to this and wondering, can I start over? Let me tell you, yes. It's not too late. You're not too broken. And your story, it's not over. Because sometimes, the most powerful chapter of your life begins when you stop chasing closure and start living open. I'm Luna Morgan. And this is not a comeback story. It's a becoming. 3 months passed. The Leadership Summit had reopened a door not just to opportunity, but to something far more intimate: confidence. For the first time in years, I wasn't second-guessing myself at every turn. I wasn't shrinking to make others comfortable. I had stopped apologizing for taking up space. One morning, as I walked through the aisles of a local bookstore looking for a thank you gift for one of my event staffers, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A flyer. Women's Entrepreneur Roundtable. Seeking featured speakers. Theme: reinvention. I stared at it for a long time. Reinvention. The word pulsed at me like it knew my name. That night, I applied. Not as a vendor. Not as a planner. But as a speaker. Weeks later, they called. Luna, we'd love to feature you as our closing storyteller. Me, yes. You. Your story. It's exactly what women need to hear right now. So there I was, standing on stage at a community auditorium in Santa Monica, facing a crowd of 300 women, CEOs, mothers, artists, students. Some wore heels. Others wore sneakers. But all of them leaned forward like they were searching for something in my voice. I told them everything. Not the polished version, but the real one. The part about losing Jack. The part about Charlotte's silence. The guilt. The shame. The way I used success as a shield until life stripped it away. And then I told them about the day I stopped asking the world to validate me and started validating myself. I ended with this. You don't need a second chance handed to you. Sometimes, you just need to give yourself permission to begin again. Not from scratch, but from strength. From the woman you became in the fire. The room was still. Not quiet, but sacred. Afterward, as I stepped off the stage, dozens of women came up to me. Some hugged me with trembling hands. Others just said thank you. One whispered. I thought I was the only one. I realized then this wasn't just about my healing. It was about theirs too. Charlotte called the next morning. I listened to your talk. Mom. Someone sent me the recording. My heart stopped. She paused. I'm proud of you. We didn't say much after that. But we didn't have to. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt in one day. They just need to stop burning. Today, I run a small mentorship circle for women over 40 who are rebuilding. Some are divorced. Some are grieving. Some are simply tired of pretending they're fine. We don't fix each other. We witness each other. And in that witnessing, we rise. So if you're out there, listening, wondering if this world still has room for your voice, your passion, your becoming, hear me. It does. And you're not late. You're right on time. Last Sunday, as golden light spilled through the windows of my little studio in Venice Beach, I laid out a fresh set of journals on a folding table. It was the start of our 8th session in the mentorship circle. A small group of women I now call sisters. Not clients. They came in slowly. One by one. Each carrying her own storm behind the eyes, but also a softness that hadn't been there months before. There was Meredith, who had just finalized her divorce after 30 years. Rachel, rebuilding her life after beating breast cancer. And Danielle, a former executive who had quietly left her 6-figure job after a burnout so deep it nearly swallowed her whole. Each of them, different stories, but one shared hunger to be seen, not fixed, to live, not just survive. That day, our session's theme was the power of saying yes to yourself. I watched them write, then speak shaky at first, but then stronger, louder, freer. And as I looked around that room, I thought to myself, this is what I almost missed. Had I let shame win? Had I let age or grief or regret define me? I would have never found this space. This quiet revolution of women showing up for themselves, for each other. At the end of our meeting, Meredith came up to me and said, Luna, you saved my life. I shook my head gently. No. Meredith, you did. You just needed someone to remind you it was still yours. Later that evening, I walked along the shoreline. The waves whispered against my ankles, and I closed my eyes. This journey wasn't about returning to who I once was. It was about becoming someone new, stronger, softer, wiser. And if you're still listening, Still wondering if your moment will come? Let this story be your sign. Your pain is not the end. It's the beginning. Your breakdown can be your breakthrough. All you have to do is say yes, yes, to the version of you that the world hasn't met yet. Because she's already waiting. And she's beautiful. This morning, I stood in front of my mirror, brushing my silver-streaked hair into a soft bun. No makeup, just skin that has lived, cried, laughed, and healed. I caught my reflection, not the tired woman I used to see, but someone rooted, present, whole. I whispered to her, "We made it." Later that day, I was invited to speak at a high school just outside of Pasadena. A guidance counselor had heard my podcast interview and said, "These girls need to hear you, especially the ones already telling themselves they're not enough." I said yes. When I arrived, I didn't expect much, just a small classroom. Maybe 20 girls. But the auditorium was full. Rows of teenagers in hoodies, braids, headscarves, eyeliner. Some slouched, others curious. A few clearly didn't want to be there. I walked to the mic, took a breath, and began. "Hi, my name is Luna, and I've failed. I've fallen apart. I've lost things I thought I couldn't live without." A few girls looked up. But I'm still here. And not just surviving, I'm living. For 30 minutes, I told them my story. Not to impress them, but to remind them you don't have to wait until the world claps for you to clap for yourself. You don't have to shrink to be loved. You don't have to be perfect to matter. At the end, one girl barely 15 came up with trembling lips. She said, "I didn't know women like you existed." I knelt down, held her hand, and said, "But now you do. And someday, someone will say that to you too." When I left that school, the sun was setting low over the hills. I sat in my car and wept, not out of sadness, but because I knew every part of my journey, the pain, the silence, the heartbreak, it had a purpose. It wasn't just about me. It was a seed. And now, it's blooming in places I'll never even see. And maybe that's the lesson. We rise not just for ourselves, but so others know they can too.